A thin, sweat-stained young man paces through the darkness, shirt stuck to his back, boots grinding dust into the floor, ears flicking at every creak in the old adobe. This isn't the Billy the Kid you see, spinning his pistol in Hollywood. This is the real version, hunched and hollow-eyed, catching sweat under the lamp in Fort Sumner. Not the cocky trick shooter, not the grinning outlaw from pulp novels, but a hungry, hunted, ragged, 21-year-old, jumpy, exhausted, running out of hours, running out of luck, and with death closer than he knows. You know the legend, Billy the Kid, too fast for the law, slipping through every net, cut down in a blaze of glory or not at all. If you believe the imposters who kept popping up for decades afterward, each one hoping that claiming to be Billy would buy them a slice of immortality. But the reality of his last night, it's smaller, sweatier, not something Hollywood could ever market with a straight face. Let's pull the camera close, no space for legend padding tonight. What did Billy try to choke down for his last meal? What happened to his body and mind after weeks of running, hiding, and barely sleeping? How much did plain exhaustion and paranoia chip away at him compared to any bullet? That's the story we're unraveling, a ground-level, hour-by-hour breakdown of Billy the Kid's final night, where every ache, every clench of the gut, every sticky bead of sweat mattered more than gun smoke ever did. So, quick context, just what you need to know. Billy's real name was probably Henry McCarty, though he cycled through aliases. William H. Bonnie, sometimes Henry Antrim. He grew up an orphan, drifting from New York's tenements to the raw edge of the New Mexico frontier. By 1881, he'd become the most wanted man in the territory's central figure in the Lincoln County War. Fluent in Spanish, just as comfortable with the Hispanic ranchers of Fort Sumner as with the drifting Anglo outlaw. Sheriff Pat Garrett was hunting him, and Billy had recently managed a jail escape that left 2 deputies dead. There was now a bounty on his head big enough to make even old friends hesitate before meeting his eye. By July 13th, Billy is hiding out in or near Pete Maxwell's house at Fort Sumner, a little compound of battered adobe and flickering lamps, where he should have been safe, but the tension is thick enough to chew. He's visibly underfed, with that wiry strength you only get from constant motion and constant hunger. Shirt sticking to his skin, boots scuffed, feet probably chewed up from miles of anxious travel. Sleep's a joke. Every hour he shifts between pacing, peering through dusty windows, or trading whispers with friends who suddenly don't seem so friendly anymore. Food? Mostly an irritant. An outlaw's last supper doesn't come off a menu. If Billy got dinner at all, it was likely cold beans scraped from a tin, a scrap of tortilla, maybe a stale hunk of bread. He forced down a couple bites, enough to keep his hands from shaking, not enough to silence the ache in his belly. Hunger sharpened his nerves and made every other discomfort worse. His lips were cracked, his mouth dry and sour, a taste that only got nastier as his stomach twisted. But the real threat was paranoia. At some point, Billy had to wonder if someone in that cramped adobe told Pat Garrett exactly where to look. His body showed the suspicion, hands fidgeting at the seams of his shirt or hovering near his pistol, collar tugged loose, eyes flicking to every shadow. The air sat heavy and unmoving, full of the smell of dust, stale beans, and the nervous sweat of men who hadn't washed in days. This wasn't a man prepping for a last stand. This was a kid barely more than a teenager, down to scraps of food, a half-empty canteen, and the gnawing sense that he was running out of both time and trust. That night, The hours dragged on. Billy's nerves went physical, restless hands twisting whatever was nearby, thumb tracing the butt of his pistol, sweat gathering in every crease. The heat inside made it impossible to settle every time he tried. It pushed him up again. He paced grooves in the dirt floor, would lean his back to the coolness of a cracked plaster wall, then squint out at the starlit yard, wondering if any of those shadows were moving. Outside, the heat and the adobe walls hadn't faded with sunset. Inside, the air was thick with old beans, sour sweat, and the sharpness of men who hadn't gotten real rest or real food in days. Billy wiped his forehead, his hand coming away slick and leaving another dark patch on already filthy trousers. No matter how tired he got, the adrenaline wouldn't let him relax. He was so wound up that sleep wasn't even an option. Conversation had dried up too. Pete Maxwell's place used to be loud with music and whiskey. Now, every word felt like a risk. Bring up the possibility of a traitor and suddenly everyone studied their boots. Billy tried to crack a joke, something about how an outlaw's last meal is usually just cold tortillas, and the hope no one poisoned the beans. But not even gallows humor could cut the tension. Every noise outside, every rumor Garrett seen near the river, strangers asking questions, somebody spotted riding after dark, tightened the noose a little more. Billy listened, but no longer knew who to trust. Every friend seemed as likely to betray him as to stick around. Physical exhaustion crept in, slow and ugly. Billy's voice cracked when he spoke. He rubbed his eyes until the skin was red and sore. He kicked off his boots for a few minutes, feet swollen and blistered, socks damp with sweat. He tried to eat again, but his stomach turned at the taste of cold beans, nerves, or spoiled food. Didn't matter. Forced down 3 bites, gave up on the rest. One friend tried to joke about betting on your last supper, but nobody wanted in. Every minute brought another small misery. Sweat pooled at the small of his back, itching from collar to belt. His hair stuck in dirty clumps to his forehead. The sticky film on his teeth grew thicker. Every hour he avoided water, rationing his canteen because the well was too exposed to risk a trip outside. And then beyond all the sweat and hunger, it was the silence that did the worst damage. Every lull, every quiet moment, Billy's nerves spun stories for him. A thump outside, a scrape, a cough just enough to send a rush of adrenaline through his chest. Sometimes he gripped his pistol just to feel something solid. Sometimes he just stared at the door, willing it to stay shut. By midnight, any bravado he'd had was gone. Billy was running on fumes and whatever calories he'd managed to choke down. His mind started drifting, suspicion growing like a physical itch. Did Pete Maxwell flinch when someone mentioned Garrett? Did the laughter from the corner mean anything, or was it just nerves? The heat, the hunger, the constant waiting each took another chunk out of his judgment. For all the legend about gunfighters facing down death like it's nothing, the actual experience is a lot more sweat, a lot more fear, and a creeping sense that the story's going to end with a whimper, not a gunfight. But it's not over yet. As the house settles into a tense, sweaty quiet, Billy stands. He's restless, nerves jangling, maybe hearing something outside, or maybe just hungry enough to go looking for food again. Either way, he makes one last trip into the dark. He slips toward Pete Maxwell's bedroom, likely aiming to grab a bite or escape the stifling heat for a minute. The house is nearly silent, the air thick, every step a risk. Billy calls out in Spanish, "¿Quién es?" A question hanging in the air, suspended between suspicion and exhaustion. No bravado, no famous showdown, just nerves, sweat, and a split second of not knowing. Pat Garrett is already there, crouched in the shadow with his gun ready, watching the silhouette in the doorway. The trigger pulls almost before Billy's finished his question, a reflex, maybe fear, acting for both of them. The shot explodes, the room flashes, and then everything collapses into chaos. Billy folds, knees giving, all that exhaustion and hunger now meaningless compared to the sudden, white-hot pain. Blood pours out, thick and sticky, soaking bedding, puddling on the dirt floor, mixing with the stale smells of sweat and old beans. The metallic tang fills the air. For a few seconds or maybe a minute, Billy tries to breathe. Maybe there's a gasp, maybe a word, or maybe just silence. In the aftermath, the room is chaos and stillness all at once. Pete, Maxwell, and the others stare in shock. Some don't believe it's really Billy. Most are just frozen, not ready for what comes next. Nobody rushes in for a tearful goodbye. The air is thick with fear, the smell of blood and sweat, and the knowledge that the legend ended not with a duel, but with a misstep in the dark. The body is handled fast, no autopsy, just a hasty burial in the Fort Sumner cemetery. No death photo, no solemn procession. If Billy left behind any personal effects, they vanish into rumor. Physically, it's immediate. There's no more running, no more hiding, no more defiance by reflex. The real aftermath takes decades. Garrett gets famous, then infamous, accused of a coward's ambush. The lack of a body photo, the speed of the burial, the jumble of witness accounts, each one fuels the myth. Was it really Billy? Was there a switch? Did someone else die in his place? The facts of that sticky, suffocating night get buried under layers of novels and movies, each one inventing a cleaner ending. Billy dying on his feet. 6 guns blazing, or quietly slipping away to become a Texas ranch hand. But if you push through the myth and zoom in on what actually happened, on the sweat, the hunger, the nervous pacing, the confusion in a dark, airless room, it turns out, there's no legend at all. Just a body pushed past its limits. A young man who survived everything except exhaustion, betrayal, and one unlucky moment. The myth sticks because the truth is too small and too sticky to tell around a campfire. But if you want the real West, that's where you have to look. Not at the gunfight, but at the slow collapse of courage, flesh, and trust. Billy's legend outran his actual physical end. If the story of the heroic last stand loses a little shine with every uncomfortable detail, maybe that's for the best. We don't need more legends. We need reality. Bad food, worse nerves, and a single fatal human mistake. If you want more episodes that dig into the real, physical, and sometimes just plain weird realities of outlaw America, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Next time you hear a legend, ask yourself, did it really end with a bang, or just a sticky, exhausted whimper in the dark?